mentor. And TechSoup helps other nonprofits with their technology needs and resources in terms of solutions and products and all sorts of events, all these different things going on for helping nonprofits get the technology that they need to better achieve their missions. And I work in a new division, new meaning a year and a half, so really not that new anymore, division of Caravan Studios. And Caravan Studios basically is a team of 8 of us, some of us part-time, and we produce apps for social benefit. There aren't that many orgs like Caravan Studios. There's one in Brooklyn I just discovered today, but there are very few dedicated orgs that are making apps for social benefit. So the way that we're doing that is we're talking to a bunch of nonprofits because we have all these years since 1987 history talking to nonprofits, and we're finding out what keeps them up at night, not their technology issues, but kind of what gets in the way of you doing your job. And from those multi-interviews with hundreds of nonprofits, we figure out technology interventions that eventually become prototypes, which eventually we test with nonprofits, and they become apps. So we've got three in the marketplace. One, you can see the sign behind you called Safe Night. And Safe Night essentially is a crowdfunding app that helps domestic violence organizations crowdfund hotel rooms for victims of domestic violence when there are no available shelter beds. And unfortunately, that's often. So any given night in the state of California, 6,919 people get turned away from shelters because there's no available beds. So it's a real problem. Safe Night's trying to solve it. You can go to safenight.org, safenightapp.org, and put it on your phone. It's available in all marketplaces. Another app that we have is called Range. Range was basically developed to help get the word out about the summer meals program. So youth getting free meals in the summer. Hi, Robbie. Robbie's a volunteer too. And so is Mark at the front door. So Range helps locate free meals for youth that are nearby. So it just basically geolocates so anyone can put that on their phone as well and find out free meals during the summer months. So that's the two. And the third one is called 4 Bells, and we're in beta testing it right now. 4 Bells will be an app that helps deploy known volunteers during time-sensitive, urgent situations, emergencies. So that's the 3. Caravanstudios.org is our website. @CaravanStudios is our Twitter account. That's me. @SUZBOOP. If you are going to tweet during this event, please use the hashtag Wi-Fi information right there. Hello. We also have some announcements. I'm going to hand it to Lewis and to the other Scott McLeod that I thought he wrote to me, and I had another Scott McLeod who I thought it was, but different guy, same name. But I have an event coming up on the 25th of September, Friday the 26th, of September, between 9 and noon, which is an apps for social benefit demo breakfast, where people who built those are going to demo them, and we're going to have a room of nonprofits and other people who are interested. And if you're interested in that, email me or tweet at me or look on the Caravan Studios website. It's on the front page. With that, I'm going to pass the mic to Lewis, who has an announcement or two. Oh, there you go.
Hi. So I have 2 announcements. One, TechSoup. We are in the middle of doing our annual storytelling campaign. TechSoup believes that nonprofits need to know how to tell their story, that they're campaigning, inspiring their supporters, outreach, everything depends on the ability to tell an inspiring story. So we have 2 exciting events coming up. One, September 4th, a global tweet chat. We have 13 full hours starting in New Zealand at 10 p.m. on the 3rd, continuing from New Zealand to Australia to Kenya, South Africa. So check out, just Google Storymakers TechSoup, and you'll get to our lineup. And then the other thing, Box.org reached out to us, so I'm going to be tweeting tonight They have their once-a-year conference coming up September 3rd. It's a $1,000 50 ticket. We have a code where you'll get it for free. So check that out and spread the word. Thanks.
Any announcements for job stuff? Okay. And Scott has an announcement.
Cool. Thank you.
Sure.
I appreciate it. I'm here from a company called Spruce. We're doing research for engineers and social media people. Figure out if it's worth us building a service that helps you guys create images. So we've been hearing over the last few weeks in our research that you guys spend a lot of time either finding images or creating images. And we're hoping with research for our client, we can find out if you guys want something to create images easy. So I'm here to collect some of your guys' feedback and thoughts, if you think it's useful or not. And the URL right now is tryspruce.com, and we're following Spruce on Twitter. And basically for the next few weeks, we're just creating infographics and images for people. So it's for you guys, it's free content.
And my guess is that my Twitter brigade right here in the corner is probably tweeting that out. So you guys can, we'll see it up here and you guys can retweet it as well. Sure. And I think I had one more announcement. Oh yes, I just wanted to, who in the room is looking for jobs or gigs? Raise your hand. Talk to those smart people afterwards if you have them. Other than that, with no further ado, I'm going to hand the mic over to Mark Williams, who has been at Apple, was at Apple for 16 years. I didn't really memorize your bio, but he's a community guy, super smart, worked in customer service and community 16 years, knows this shit, and let him tell you the rest. Give it up. Oh, and we have a live stream. We have a live stream with people watching online as well.
All right, thank you. I feel like I'm common. All right, welcome everyone. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, volunteers. And I'm going to turn myself up. I think I'm here. There we go. That's a little better for me. Welcome. So this is KCS and Community, a tragic love story. It's a conversation in 3 acts. Act 1 is we're going to take a shallow dive into KCS, figure out why it's shallow in a minute. Act 2, we'll talk about how we can bring those concepts into our practice of community management. And Act 3 is the tragic twist. But first, I want to tell you a little bit about 16. As an intern, I worked on Apple support for a very long time. I did 10 years on the community side, so at Apple Discussions. One of the claims names while I was there, if you Google discussions, Apple Discussions was the first item that came up for me. So I did everything from the technology side to planning projects and running it day to day. And so for the last 4 years, I've been doing some of my own stuff. I have a personal incubator, if you will, and writing software and some of that, and we'll come back to that. But let's go to Act 1. What is knowledge-centered support? So knowledge-centered support started in 1992. The simple premise was capture, structure, reuse, support content. And they had some early adopters, 3Com, Microsoft, and there's a whole list. And I'm going to point you to this website because this is the guys that came up with it, Consortium of Service Innovation, and they have a whole KCS certification of which I am not. And I want to be very clear about that because I'm going to be speaking about this because I find it very interesting, and I have read a lot of the information on their website. They've got a great website. The kcsacademy.net is fantastic. And they even had a nice presentation that I cribbed a lot of this Act 1 from, so thank you to them. But I'm going to skip some because it's not important to what we're going to talk about in Act 2. So if you find what I'm talking about today interesting, I encourage you to go to one of these 2 places and find more information, because I'm certainly not going to cover it all. There are 2-day-long classes where you cover it, and I've got about 10 minutes to get through. So what is knowledge-centered support? It's a methodology, not a technology, although it often ends up talking about technology, it's a set of practices, and it's all about creating solutions to problems. It's not necessarily the right answer, but it's about creating a good enough answer. And it's all the process internally where, and they're really focused internally. They're focused on call centers, contact centers, agents, and that kind of thing. And the idea is creating content that we can reuse and then making sure that that content is good. And so they focus on content as king. It seeks to create content that is good enough to be findable and usable by the target audience. It's not perfect necessarily, and that gets them in some trouble. We'll come to that in a minute. And solutions have a life cycle. So everything is, we're going to talk about the life cycle right now. So this is, like I said, cribbed right from their presentation. It's pretty nice. It gives you a pretty good idea of what they're talking about. So you start over, I don't have my pointer, but you start over here in the solve portion and capturing the workflow. So they're talking about when somebody calls in with a question, a problem, or they contact the contact center, the first thing they do is they search for something. If they can find it, then it gets connected. So if you have a question and you find a solution in the knowledge base, you connect those two things so that you know later that that is a solution that was useful. If you can't find it, then you maybe start a small piece of content, a draft, and then it goes through this whole life cycle. You create a workflow, it goes to tier 1, tier 2, potentially, depending on how layered your whole situation is. And it really focuses on looking at the analytics on the backside to say, was this piece of content that this person created really useful? And if not, do we need to get rid of it, or do we need to rewrite it? And I think it's a really cool way to look at content management instead of forcing yourself to be perfect all the time, but looking at what's really useful and looking at the analytics, because I think sometimes in customer service, we look at analytics, but not necessarily in ways that are helping people. They're in ways that how much are we saving? And that's not necessarily the right analytics. Like, if we're just asking how much money are we saving for this knowledge base or for a community, what's our ROI? That's not necessarily always the right question to ask. It could be one part of that conversation. So this is the process, and they have people that do these things, and we're going to talk real quick about people because this is important later. So you have your frontline agents. They're the closest to the customer, and this is what, when I saw this presentation a long time ago, 5 or 6 years ago now, this is the thing that dinged like in my head. This closest to the customer. The agent is the closest to the customer. And so they search for, customer calls in, they search for an answer, they find it, they connect it, they give it back to the customer. If they can't find it, they create it. The real trick here is giving them the tools to create those solutions. And this is where the technology comes into play. Rose, you got a picture? All right. So, and then you have this idea of a senior agent or a second tier. You've got a number of different names for it. They call it a KCS solution provider, I think is what the official term is. This is how I think of it. And they're focused on the quality of that content. So if your frontline agent created something, it goes up to this person to say, we can make this better. Or, we don't need that. That was going to be a one-off question. We're never going to see that again. Don't worry about it. So that's what this person is all about. They're possibly also creating that content, but they're more focused on making that content even that much better. Then you have a publisher. And the publisher is the one, and this actually, I forgot to mention this, so there's two kind of halves to this. They have an internal client base and an external client base. So that a lot of the draft content gets created internally and internally facing, so your agents can see it, but it doesn't necessarily go published out to the wider world. So if you have a knowledge base that's customer facing, the drafts, the first pieces of content are not going to go immediately out to those areas. This publisher role is what's sort of focused on, is this an internal content or is this something that should be external? And then can we make it that much better so we can release it to our customers? And then you have a domain expert. And this person, I think this would possibly be the most fun role of all of them, because this person is the one that's collating all of this information and saying, okay, we have this HP computer, and I want to make sure we have all the best content and around and created, and looking at it constantly, making sure we have the best answers available. This, for me, I mean, for my personality, is fun because it's looking at all kinds of patterns and usage and all of that kind of thing. And then you have a leadership role, and this is really, really important, because if you don't have a leader that's really focused on what is our strategy, what are we trying to solve, what are the who are we selling this to? Are we selling it to our CEO or our VP or whoever? This role, you really can't do any of the rest of it without this role. And the couple of people that I've talked to that where KCS has kind of not worked as well, is because this role was not powerful enough, or didn't really have the oomph behind it. There's a couple of other roles here that I don't list out. There's a coach role, which is taking, if you've got an agent that's writing content, maybe it's not quite good enough, that coach comes in and says, okay, let's help you make that content that much better. Let's focus on making you a better content creator. And you also have an analytics role that looks at, and we'll come to talking about analytics in just a minute, but you're going to have an analytics role potentially. That could be the domain expert, those could be cross-platform. Depends on how big your company is. In a company like Microsoft, your analytics role is going to be probably an entirely separate team, right? If you're a 40-person startup, you're going to be doing all these roles. You're screwed. So, template. So one of the things they talk about is a template of how you're going to do these things, or content template. So you have an issue. So this is very specific to KCS. I don't know if it's necessary for what we're going to be talking about in Act 2, but I wanted to present it. I think it's important for the KCS solution providers. You want a very specific issue, environment resolution, cause, and then you have all this metadata that goes with it. This is my favorite picture, I think, in the whole presentation. This is actual instructions on how to use a toilet. And in the whole process, in this template process, you have a work in progress, a draft, you have reviews, you have approve, and you could have multiple reviews. You could have a legal review, you could have a marketing review, you could have domain expert reviews. So the review cycle, you can really get bogged down in the review cycle. And I would recommend, if you ever do this, to do assume approved. So if the approver doesn't get back in 2 weeks or whatever, then it automatically gets approved. So basically, they get to shut down, but if they ignore it, then it has to go forward. Then you have a publish, and then you potentially have an archive step. And that's one of the other things that I think is really cool about this, is they focus on, if this is not doing you any good anymore, archive it, get rid of it. You don't want it in there. You don't want it confusing people. And then the final step here is this content health step. The final step we're going to be talking about is this content health. Because content health is all about the connections and what I talked about archiving. If you're not having interesting information, get rid of it. If it's really good, if it's getting a lot of connections with cases that are being solved, look at it and make sure it's really as good as it can be, because you may want to improve it, or it may need to be touched more regularly or looked at more regularly. You may not, or you may want to leave it alone if it's for an old product and you don't want to do anything with it, but you want to make sure, links don't break or that kind of thing. So I think this is one of the more important spots in the whole process as well. By the way, if you have questions, you can ask as I go along. You raise your hand. I didn't mention that earlier. It won't bother me. And then this is sort of the final thing here. So KCS is not something we do in addition to solving problems. It's how we solve problems. That's the KCS way. So that brings us to Act 2. KCS and the practice of community management. So like I said, when I saw this presentation about KCS years ago, the thing that dinged in my head was it's closest to the customer. But as a community manager at the time, I said, who's closer to the customer than your agent? Anybody want to guess? The customer. There you go. Oh, no, not the community manager, the customer. The community. Who's closer to your customer than your agent? Your customer, right? And here's a great example. So this is the Ford Cavertran. It's a great van for getting people back and forth from various places. Used a lot in airports and that kind of thing. And I'm sure when Ford released it, and I think it was really, I looked it up and I've forgotten now, but it was like 91, I think. When Ford released it, you know they had service manuals. Somebody spent a lot of time creating manuals and how you operate this, training their support people. Somebody called in with problems. You know somebody really spent a lot of time making sure their documentation was top notch. But they probably did not expect this. This is the disco fish. And here's another probably slightly better example of it. This is probably actually right now driving around Burning Man. I know the guy, I've met the guys that actually put this together. And there is a Ford Cavertran right in here, kind of right. And there's a whole blog post about how they did this. They had to cut like the side out. And what you can't see from here, but it blows fire right up top there. It's got a flamethrower right up. So, how fun is that, right? But you know the Ford guys didn't have any idea that they could do, that, you know, somebody could do this with their beloved Cavertran, right? Like that. You know, imagine this phone call. Hi, this is Ford Support. My name is Mark. How can I help you? Yes, I would like to have fire come out the front of my van. Okay, hold on just a second. Let me look that up here. Fire van. Okay. It says here if you see fire coming out your van, you should get out. Get out of the van. No. I want fire to come out. No, sir. Let me get you to Tier 2. And Tier 2 comes on the line, and Tier 2 says, no, get out of the van. No, I want to get fire coming out of the van. Oh, well, we can't help you with that. Our legal team says no. Right? So that's what's going to happen if they call. But if somebody wanted to put flashing lights on the side, these guys could help. If you had a customer community, I mean, this is the extreme example, but it's fun because we're having, you know, Burning Man is out there. That's probably where some of you folks are. If you're watching this after Burning Man, I hope you had a good time. But you hope that if somebody had a question on how to put flashing lights or fire or a disco ball out the back of their van, these guys would come in and help, right? So I got to thinking about this circle. And I got to thinking about how could we make it two separate things. You could have an internal and you could have a community. And you could manage these things in a similar way. You could both have them with the process going for both of them, because ideally it would be one giant process. You'd have your internal and your external community, but let's be real, most companies aren't going to let that happen. You're going to have your knowledge creators, and they're not going to really want to talk to the community people, and the community people aren't really going to want to create the knowledge probably. I mean, there's exceptions to this, but this is probably the more realistic option. And so you have a central sort of knowledge area that they both feed into. This is kind of my love, if you will. This is what I would like to see. And potentially even you have this, well, you have the knowledge, then you potentially have three different circles. Because you have the knowledge, and that's watching for your internal analytics and content health and that kind of thing, possibly kicking it back into the internal or community or your your community, your external community. And then hopefully you also have this larger loop that maybe your community can feed back into your internal teams, and your internal teams can feed back into the community, hopefully with some coaching from your community team to not piss off your external community. I would encourage you, if you're going to open something like this up, if you think this is cool, to put some processes in place before you open up your external community to your writers, because your writers are going to have very specific ideas about what a knowledge-based article looks like that your community is not going to like. Your community is probably going to have their own ideas. And you want that. You want two different approaches to a certain extent, overlapping but different, because they're different needs, they're different people. You can't most of the time tell your community exactly what to do, right? You want to give them opportunities and give them suggestions. Your community manager, you probably know some of this. And your internal team are going to be measured on getting it right and how that focus is working. But you also still...
Can I ask?
Yeah.
So are you saying that in your experience, like internal people can't like switch and, you know, like the good writer can have multiple voices, right? So
I had the people I've talked to and the times I've seen it, I've seen it if you coach them a little bit, but just turning them loose tends to run into the issues. Because they may not know what the voice of the community is, they may not know how to interact directly.
Yeah.
But I think it can happen, yes, and that's what I'm sort of talking
the
about.
community management practice anyway, everything is involved is
Yeah.
some.
Yeah, definitely. No, I think it can happen. I definitely think so. And I think the people that are going to want to do this, that are going to want to reach out to the community, already have some of that in their head. But what you don't want is that internal employee going into your community and saying, "You're wrong." Like that, you know, that's the worst possible thing that can happen, because they're going to run. They're like, "Fuck you! I don't want to deal with this part of my friendship." Do we bleep on the? You know, you don't want that kind of thing to happen, right? But you still want, even if you have all of these things, you still want you know, your capture, your structure, your reuse, your search and link. Can you figure out a way for your community, if you have a forum, on-domain forums, that if somebody answers something with your knowledge base, can you link to that? Can you provide that to your internal analytics team? Because even if your phone team is not linking to that internal content, that doesn't mean it's not valuable. It could be valuable to the external community. Maybe the support contracts have run out. Maybe there's a lot of different reasons. So this is one of those places where technology can come into play. Reviews and approvals. Maybe you don't have approvals on your external community, but maybe you have reviews. Maybe you encourage your higher end users, your VIPs, to review some of this content and say, oh, maybe we can make some improvements here. And you want to look at your content health, both for your external and your internal teams, and you maybe have some VIP persons that are willing to do some of this for you, that are willing to look at global trends and look at what's needed to supplement your internal stuff. Hey, we need somebody to write a bunch of posts about how to add lights to the side of the Cavatran van. Okay, again, an unlikely story, but there are things. There was someone here, I think last time, who was talking about they had we'll call it a medical device that was being used for non-medical purposes, but they couldn't talk about that because they were legally not allowed to talk about it. But maybe their community could have. Maybe they could have allowed for that. And of course, you need leadership. You need leadership both internal and external. If you're ever going to start a community, hire a community manager. I'm talking to the choir here, but really, come on, please hire a community manager. You need one. So there we go. There's the circles. There's how it could be done. And this gets us to Act 3, the strategy. So why do I say the tracking? Well, here you go. So here's your KCS vendors. These are right from the KCS website. You've got people like Apteam, Inquira, Salesforce, right? And by the way, these are both version 4 and version 5. I don't know what the difference is between the two of them, but these are have been at some point qualified under the KCS certification. Yes, they're content systems or document systems. So writing knowledge base articles, knowledge bases, that kind of thing. You have your community event. You're going to recognize these. There's Jive, Lithium, Meetup, right? Like, the ones I'm more familiar with. These are the ones you could probably pull this off with a bit more. Like, I know Lithium has the knowledge base, which is something that does allow for some of these kinds of processes for your external communities. You have Jive. Jive has an internal wiki kind of solution. I've not worked with their latest version, but it's there. It probably does not have the workflows and the kind of things we want, but it's there. MediaWiki, obviously, it's a wiki. IPM apparently has some of these solutions, although you never see them. And then Acquia this one is Acquia. By the way, if you have a website and you don't have a press area where you can get a logo of your company, you failed. This is a white on white because I took it off of their website. So just, if you run a company, please put a press area with just a basic logo. It's not that hard. Combination vendors. Here we go. Here's our combination vendors. Well, there's not many. You know, like I said, there's Jive. There's actually one maybe called eGain. I found it yesterday. But as a community platform vendor, they actually lock their community behind a paywall, which in my mind is a fail. Because if I can't see how your community runs, then I don't push it. So maybe that would work. Maybe eGain is out there. I didn't put a logo up because I don't care. And to be sure, let's be clear, this is very hard, right? I have been looking at this for going on 6 years, kind of as a hobby. I probably need a new hobby. But you know, at one point I looked. You know, I have a 5-year-old, so we have a lot of art supplies, and I had this big giant paper on the ground, and I tried to figure out like what the permission model would look like, and it's really hard because it's hard enough to create a knowledge-based system that is usable, and probably hard to get a KCS certification. I've never tried, and it's hard to do a good community system. I mean, a basic forum is easy, but put the kind of tools that we need as community managers in there, and it's difficult, especially if you're going to build something that multiple kinds of communities can use. And then you try and combine them together, and I can't imagine that this would not be difficult. So I can kind of understand why we have this unicorn here, as beautiful as it might be. But don't panic, because here's the deal. You can do some of this without having the one wonderful unicorn tool. But don't run out and start just throwing stuff on the wall, because you could get something like this. And this is something I actually saw, and I didn't put the logo or the brand or anything because it was an open source tool, so I'm kind of giving them some credit. But you know, they have the official documentation, the FAQ, the wiki. Okay, so there's 3 different places to go get some content. There's the blog, the mailing list, the forum, and then maybe you can find them on IRC. Now, where are you going to go to get your answers? Google. That might work if all their content is SEO friendly and maybe. But this was awful. I walked away. I'm not going to use this tool because if I have a problem, I have no idea where to go. So don't do this, please. If you love your customer, and I think you do if you're here, don't do this because it just makes people really, really sad. So don't do this. But you can do some things. Like you can get here, right? You can find your makers. You can find your frontline, your second tier, your publishers. I talked about this a little bit earlier. You can find some of these people in your community because, as we all know, I hope, community members have different talents and want to do different things with your community. when I was at Apple, I had a wonderful woman who would go into these threads. People were really frustrated, would come in and like these hard problems, and she would go in and say, I don't know the answer, but I feel your pain, and somebody's going to be here and welcome. And poor thing, she'd never gotten any points because that's just not helpful in the parlance that we were looking for. But I loved her because she was welcoming. And maybe she would be a great editor, or maybe she would be somebody that would collate something. Maybe you have somebody that doesn't necessarily want to answer questions, but would be willing to look across your content space and say, you know, that and that go together, we should maybe put these together. Or, oh, you know what, this has a broken link, and you know, now it goes to porn, and we really need to get rid of that. Maybe you can look at some of those kinds of things, give them access to your analytics. There's a lot of different ways you can do this sort of on the cheap or without the help of some really great tools. And the other thing is, if you're really looking to create content, maybe you can create a template, or maybe you can create a suggested style guide. Maybe you can task one of these folks with looking at what is a good style guide for a community site. What do we want our content to be? I think there's some really some good opportunities here as well. And then obviously you can analyze and you can promote your own content. As community managers, if you're not looking at what is your most popular content, what is really getting the answers, you really should be. And then put that out there. If you've got a new launch of a new product, can you pre-create? Have some of your community managers or members pre-create some content. Give them access to your tool ahead of time or your product. If you can, sometimes you can't, but give them access, ask them to write some cool content for you, get that out there and promote it. And I think the overlooked thing in a lot of spaces is curate component, and it's hard to do because it ends up on a blog, and if it's ending up on a blog, it may be disappearing from your knowledge because blogs tend to be ethereal. So if you don't have a process to get a good blog post into something that's more permanent, then you need to work on that. But I think this is a good possibility to look externally. Maybe some of your community members are posting blog posts that are really great about your product. Can you pull that person and either pull it in or just link to it? There's some really great. Yeah.
How are you finding, like, let's say we have text, how are you finding those all of the targeted posting and some?
It's a good question, and I don't know.
I do.
Okay. Do you want to share?
I would say Scoop is a great tool to pull in references.
Scoop it? Okay. Scoop it, pull in references.
Scoop is a really good choice of that.
Right.
And then also to
Yeah. And, I mean, and I've seen people do it with blog posts. I think Twilio talked about doing, like, they would pull in their blog post. I think it was Twilio. I went to a meetup somewhere where they were talking about, you know, they would pull in, like, sort of excerpts from an external blog from one of their VIPs and then link to it, and that gives both of them some juice. So, you know, I'm not specifying a specific way to do this. I'm just saying that this is maybe one other place you can do to improve the knowledge that you have on your domain. Because that's what this is all about, is putting the knowledge on your domain. So we come back to this knowledge point. I think a lot of companies are dependent on Google now, and I think that's okay. But once they come to your site, how are you keeping them there? How are you getting their question answered? Especially if they're coming from Google and they're doing HTTPS, you're losing a lot. Most times you're losing the search query now because HTTPS doesn't often pass along the search query. So how do you know what question they're asking? And so if you have a central place where you can keep all of this knowledge, and this could be as easy, I was thinking about this today on my train up. This could be as easy as a search engine that you're feeding all of this stuff into. Like, you know, and there's a number of them that are out there. So maybe you don't actually manage your content in the knowledge source. That becomes just a search engine where it's pointing to all these places, and you're curating that content into that search engine. There's a lot of different, like I said, since there's no one way, there's no technology that does this. There are other, you can be creative here. This is not, I'm not telling you how to do it, I'm telling you these are some ideas and ways to get about it. Yeah?
We use Zendesk where I work.
Zendesk,
Yeah,
okay.
and we have some, super users who make a lot of comments and help each other on a Facebook page, for example. And so we're
Facebook
trying
page,
to
okay.
bring them in.
Yeah, because you got your
Yeah.
users, because the Facebook page, it's hard to curate that in,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And so I'm refreshing our support center on Zendesk, but have you seen examples of great ways that Zendesk has been able to kind of harness that?
No.
No.
I sorry, I haven't.
Or like any uploading, or like have you seen other tools that do that, like
No.
upload?
Sorry, I know this is the tragedy portion of the evening, and I apologize. These are ideas, and I don't necessarily have all the solutions. And if you come up with a solution, my Twitter handle is going to be up there. I'd love to hear about it because I'd love to have a great story to tell. And if I ever present this again, I could add Act 4, the recovery, or whatever. They live, but right now I haven't seen real good solutions out there. I mean, the different companies are taking some different attacks at it, but I haven't really seen a good solution.
Have you tried farming data by using JSON and building your own, maybe based on the data that you're pulling from JSON resources, and then building maybe like an API or some of that nature, a knowledge-based API?
I have certainly not. I think that would be a cool idea, and I had a very long conversation with the company not too long ago, and they owned the whole stack, and they. It was an online tool, and they have documentation right there inside the online tool. And then, but then they were worried that they weren't getting much action in their forums, and I was like, well, where are your forums? Well, you have to go to forums.mycompany.com. And I was like, but you want them to stay in your tool, and you're forcing them to go out of your tool. You're failing there. That's where your failure point is. Why don't you pull that content? You own the whole stack. Creating a basic forum is not that hard, and you have some really talented engineers, because this was a really cool tool. And I'm like, why don't you just put it right there in your tool?
But can I just add, so that's exactly my situation right now, and we're trying really hard to get it into the product, but, there's product needs, and so,
Yes.
is it okay to have help in a separate place? Well, it's kind of okay, it'd be a lot better if it wasn't, but so, I can understand why
Solving?
companies get in that situation, and hopefully you can find it.
Yeah,
So
and
it's about the untragedy.
And I think it depends on who's owning that product vision, right? I mean, this was a CEO kind of level that I was having this conversation with, and they were trying to solve some of these problems, and I was like, well, then you can't put your community and your support people down 14 rungs below your product person. Like, they're not going to get any kind of traction, and so you've got to figure out a way for that. What's more important? Where's the and maybe there's some ROI conversations there too, but their conversation was, we want people to stay on our tool, but we want them to use our forums. Okay, so you have two competing needs, and you are saying them both at the same time. What is more important? And so that's the kind of conversation that we need to have. And I have yet. There apparently was a tool a while back that doesn't exist anymore. There was a Windows tool for 3D something or other somebody told me about that actually did some of this. It sounded really cool. We had a screenshot and it had sort of a question answer on the side where you were using the tool that would actually be context specific, and I was like, oh, that sounds really pretty fantastic. But yeah, it's hard.
So I'm just a little confused here. Are you trying to get to a situation where all knowledge sits in a single knowledge base? Is that what is the Holy Grail?
That would be my Holy Grail, yeah. But I mean, there's two different pieces to this, right? That would be my Holy Grail. That's like, if you're coming somewhere, you don't want to end up where that slide I showed you, where okay, I have to pick to find where you don't want. My thought here is, you don't want the customer to have to think too much. If they're coming to your site and they have a problem, okay, well, do I want to go to the forum? Do I want to go to the knowledge base? Okay, well, there's this wiki over here. I'm going to go to Google, and you've lost to a certain extent. But there's also a piece of this that is pulling some of the concepts of KCS into community Instead of just, most communities are focused just on forums, and how do you, it's just a question and answer kind of ticket system, but where does that content then get managed and valued and potentially turned into something that's greater than just a question and answer? And I actually tried to do this even with our forum system years ago at Apple, and we had a very manual process. We would have somebody create a forum thread starter that had no answers, and we would lock it, and that would be the document. And then if they wanted to update it, they would email me, and I would go and paste it in. It was terrible. It was really not a very good solution, but I mean, it was because we had people answering the same question over and over again, and they just wanted to say, oh, go look at this. Right, and that was that, and then it would be updated constantly, and we wouldn't have all this, the same answers, thousands of times. We would go to one place, and then if there was an update, they would just update that. So there's two pieces to this, and I'm getting them kind of blurred, and I apologize for that, because I think they're both important. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. I would only comment that having been a content manager, a documentation manager, a training manager, a content manager, a community manager, this is you're tilting at windmills here. This is not possible.
That's not possible.
I think it's not. In many ways, I'm not sure whether it's a worthy goal or not, because I think it's great that this knowledge lives in all these separate places. I think the trick is to be able to get to it easily and not have the customer have to know where it is, but be able to get to that.
Right. So as you said,
I found it hard enough to get our own writers or subject matter experts, and you know this, to write to the template.
yes,
There's no way
it's difficult to
you
get to
can
write to template. Right.
A customer to be able to write to the template, have the right SEO in there, tag correctly.
It's true.
It's just hard, and so you're going to be, to your point, a lot of manual cut and paste. If you get 10 questions on the same, I think our rule of thumb was for product support, if there were 10 questions, you need a solution. I'm going to take all these answers and make a solution paper, and that goes in the knowledge base.
Right. And that's why
your community is not the community site, it's the community ecosystem. So you need to be able to get people to the multiple blogs that your customers have. If you have a thriving community, they may not live on your community site. You probably have, Apple, lots of bloggers that are writing about various Apple products. They don't want to be on the Apple side.
it's true.
How do you get people to those sites?
Well, I think that, again, thank you for queuing up this slide. So, to your point, it's hard to get all these things connected. And so this is why I kind of think about this knowledge piece as almost a search engine, but an internal search engine where you're kind of tracking the usage of that search engine, pointing to all of these pieces of content and feeding into it. And then you have this curation piece where potentially all these blog posts, you point at your search engine at that, you still pull it in, you still search it, maybe they leave your site, maybe that's okay, maybe that's, but you've got a piece of data at that point to say this is actually really useful. A lot of people are finding that. Roy, you certainly have more experience than I do here, but like I said, this is somewhat of a dream, but I don't know how many people have actually been exposed to, especially community folks, been exposed to the other side, and so that's kind of what part of this came into. And I think you had a comment here, and some of these have been going long, so I'm going to hand you a mic.
Well, the overlap, I certainly agree with you. The overlap is incredible because the overlap is incredible, and especially when, the mantra is content is king. How do you bring people to your community is you drive them there through high-value content. And so the overlap with the knowledge base, with support answers, with forums, content is the key. But it's created in so many different ways, in so many different places. It's hard, and maybe it's impossible, I think. And is it not even once you've got it all in there, it reminds me of Sun and its campus strategy. They had about 6 single campuses. Every time you got to a campus that they needed to expand, and I think this is the same with the knowledge base. Every time, if you could corral it at some point, someone else would pop up. There'd be another site, there'd be another, set of content creators, there'd be another set of blogs that you don't have.
It's true, and that is a difficult conversation, and I've definitely seen that happen. Did you want to follow up on that?
Yeah, I wanted to ask about trying Wikipedia. Has anyone tried starting with Wikipedia as a resource dump and then plugging that into the back end?
I'm sure people have. I don't know. You can hold on to that for a second. Or Mark, do you have a?
There's two tools that I think are worth talking about. One is
Okay, hold on. Wait. If you're going to talk about tools, let's get you on microphone. There you go.
Right, so there's 2 tools I think are worth talking about. One's a company called Meetup, and I believe there's others in the space. And they basically take all these disparate places where content lives and build a beautiful front-end help center. So,
Yeah. I've seen their stuff.
they would take those 6 or 7 blogs or whatever you showed and turn it into one nice front end. And then the other thing is, we're on the Lithium platform, and I think very much, it's not a perfect product, but it really does with its knowledge base and its discussions. And I know you don't like the term tribal knowledge base, but I think it's a great term. I mean, it gives you tools where you take bits and pieces from the community and you build a knowledge-based article that's referenced. All the people are referenced, so they get credit in it. So where are the shortcomings? Like, what's that missing that you want to see?
Sorry, what was the second one?
Lithium, knowledge base and discussions.
Yeah, the tribal knowledge base within the discussion. So the piece that I think is missing there is one, a workflow. So if you're going to focus on if you have both internal and external content, and that's really what we're talking about here, is the marriage of internal and external content. And if you have internal content needs much more of a structured workflow than the tribal knowledge base provides. For most companies that I've been familiar with that want to do some sort of knowledge base, they need some sort of workflow, reviews, process, that kind of thing. And the tribal knowledge base doesn't have that. But I think it does have a lot of what you need for the external portion of this concept. But that's
okay. That makes sense. I'm in a very small company, right? So one person does it, and she's the workflow.
But if you have 5 writers that needed to go through an approval process and workflows and that kind of thing at a larger company, a Microsoft or I think 3Com was one of the other ones, which I don't know if it even exists, but anymore. But these are larger companies that are going to have more of that kind of need, right? Any other? Okay. So this is sort of the last official slide, and this is to your point, trying to corral all this in one place is difficult, if not impossible. But maybe there's a way to feed it all into one place, maybe using MindTouch or using some other tool where it's pointing to all of these various resources, if it's not all in one. So this, I think, is possibly the most doable in our current environment, technology environment, the tools environment. And I think it's still valuable. And I think it's something to potentially look at. And so, the one little pitch, if you will, this is something that I'm working on. It's called Rear Channel. I was going to demo it today, but it's not ready. This is the one little pitch part of the talk. But this is very specific. I'm designing something very specifically for Twitter chats. And one of the things I've spent a lot of time thinking about is all of this that I've talked about so far, is how do I get, if it's just me creating something as the creator, how do I get content, helpful content from my users back into the tool and from me, and how can I help them help each other, especially on what I hope to be a high-end tool. If you're interested in Twitter chat tools, not Twitter timeline, but specifically around what did you say, a 36-hour Twitter chat, 30-hour Twitter chat? like, this might help you, but it's not going to be ready by then. But if you're interested in that kind of thing, talk to me afterwards. I'll probably give you a free copy if I ever get it finished. So that's it. Thank you, and I'll leave you with the. Yeah, there's, but I'm gonna. There we go. There's the final quote from Romeo and Juliet. So, questions? Where did the microphone end up over there somewhere? Can somebody run? Because I'm kind of tied to my microphone. Oh, you're interested in Twitter chat? Oh, you don't have any questions?
Yeah,
another question. Okay.
Or just the mic, not just for us, but for there's people online. In fact, I saw somebody tweeting it's not shared or it's not listening.
Okay, great. So about the real channel product, are you enabling semantics behind that?
We can talk about that later. It's not. This is not about that.
So what about the semantics behind the KCS? How you are gathering the semantics, even though you have that form in the back end? How are you climbing that to be effective? Are there any rating points that you can suggest or rating systems on?
That's a good question that I haven't solved. Any other questions? Yeah. Anyone? Okay. Oh, okay, we got a question over there.
Who do you think are cases to look at that are doing this very well?
That's a good question, and I actually had a couple, and I lost the slide, and I forgot who they are. So I apologize, because they're mostly sort of medium. It seems medium-sized companies get as close to this as possible. Big companies, I think you get into some internal politics kind of stuff that Roy was talking about, and small companies don't have the resources to really pull it off. There was a company called. They did some sort of analytics product, and I was looking at them at one point, and they seem to have a pretty good mix. Again, it looked like a lot of manual labor, to be honest. I mean, that's what we've been talking about, and I cannot remember their names. I apologize. It was something I was going to put in, and I lost the slide. Yeah, I can send it around. If I remember, I'll put it on the Twitter or maybe even the Meetup as well.
Oh, I have a question.
Yeah.
The closest example I can think of somebody doing this is Get Satisfaction, which as a tool I really only play around in demo sandbox environments. But they have, not back, although that's possible, and it is a ticketing system the way that it's used, but an example they give is on the product page, there would be reviews from the community, but also ongoing discussions that are happening about those products.
Yep.
That are fed within, let's say, the shopping environment. So that would be a way of staying in the tool, but also having access to the knowledge base. I don't know how much they're doing that external. People are writing blog posts about this green bicycle.
They're not.
Yeah.
And their tools for internal content creation are fairly weak. That's not really what they're focused on. But it is a reasonably good solution for your external. And I should have put them up there. Like you said, there were probably a dozen more I could have put on that slide.
Another question about customer service and support. You know, you mentioned about how the knowledge base could fuel both internal knowledge that your agents would give better answers, and then those answers could fuel the knowledge base. But also for the external customer, where they don't need to reach an agent anymore because they've got the answer that they need.
Sure.
Of those two scenarios, where have you seen greater success? A reduction in those that need an agent from the external perspective, or on the internal side, faster, better answers from your agents?
So if you go to the KCS website, they had I think it was a 30% reduction in caseload, and they didn't break it down. So I don't know the answer to that question, but I think it probably is self-fulfilling. Like, if you really get this working well, it's both going to reduce your, at the very least, it may even also just reduce your call time because that answer is going to show up that much faster. If you've got analytics behind it that are saying this is a really great answer for this search term and they're searching for that, man, boom, it shows up immediately. They can answer that question, get off the phone that much faster. So I think that, it fulfills itself.
seems like it would be really beneficial with chat functionality as well.
I would assume so, yeah. I've not seen it with any of the chat vendors do it, but I'm not all that familiar with the chat vendors. It's not my hobby. So I may need a new hobby. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for listening. I don't like their, I tried it.
Oh, no, well, but I went to like a community. Yeah. They were saying that they dug deep, or did you not think they were reading the truth?
No, I think they were.
Yeah, you were there, never mind.
But,
They were
they
talking
were getting there, but they were talking a lot about social.
Right.
And this is, I'm talking more on the
Okay, so on the because I was thinking, well, aren't they out there curating, trying to find a love place?